If you caught the top of the show, you heard my thoughts on the American economy that seems to be bouncing back. And if you tuned in late, you can look at it on our website. But I wanted to get another perspective from someone who has been worried about the effects of austerity, the rise in payroll taxes, the cuts mandated by the sequester, and who has a deep understanding of economics from the United States to Europe to Japan. That is why I invited Paul Krugman to join me. He is, of course, the columnist for the New York Times, a Princeton professor, and a Nobel laureate in economics.
Welcome again, Paul.
Hi there.
So if the sequester was so bad, if the expiration of the payroll tax cuts was so bad, many people like you worried a great deal about the sequester, about raising taxes, and yet the new data seems to suggest the economy is doing pretty well.
This is, let's have to have some perspective here. I mean, we're still, when we look at payroll data, we get all excited over the kinds of numbers we've been seeing recently. We forget that during those 8 years when Bill Clinton was president, the U.S. economy added 236,000 jobs in an average month. And we've had hardly any months that look as good as an average month during the 90s. So let's not get carried away. This is not too bad, but really we have defined a good economy way, way down.
So when you look at this and you say, the U.S. economy for the next few months, do you think that we've now kind of digested the sequester and the payroll tax, so it should take off even more strongly?
We don't know that. This is really, this is, I have to say, it's terribly important that somebody get these things right, but it is kind of witchcraft. It's we don't know whether households are going to look at a certain point and say, gee, I hadn't really noticed that payroll tax hike, but gee, our bank account is dwindling, and they pull back some. So we don't know whether some of these things, some of the cuts from the sequester have yet to happen. There's some other good news that people aren't talking about, which is actually a positive. State and local governments have finally, many of them have stabilized their finances. California has a significant budget surplus, and that means that one of the big drags, which is the cuts at the state and local level, is over. So that's a positive. So this could go either way, but I guess what I would say is we are still deep in a hole, and we need a lot of climb before I'm willing to call this anything like prosperity.
All right, I have to ask you about this because this is the spat between two celebrity economists, Ken Rogoff and Carmen Reinhart's essay, which talked about the tipping point at 90% debt to GDP. At which countries start growing much, much more slowly. I want to first ask you, they wrote a letter back because you've criticized them for feeding this austerity mania, which has caused governments to slash spending. And they say, you have engaged in spectacularly uncivil behavior in the past few weeks. You have attacked us in very personal terms, virtually nonstop. You've doubled down. Your characterization of our work is selective and shallow. It is deeply misleading. Now, Ken Rogoff and you were graduate students in MIT together, right?
We're actually, all of us were graduate students at MIT together. Almost everybody you've heard of. It's a village. It's kind of scary.
So what does it feel like to be embroiled?
It's very unpleasant because Ken is a magnificent economist. He's done fabulous work over the years. And then this one paper, which was thrown out hastily, unfortunately is the one that has had the greatest impact on policy debate. And never mind the question, did they make the data available? Well, other people, not in a way, that's all irrelevant. The fact of the matter is this one result, claimed result, which is that growth falls off a cliff when debt exceeds 90% of GDP. That's what the world picked up. And that result is false. That result is clearly not true. There is a mild negative correlation between debt and growth, but that cliff doesn't exist, never existed in the data, certainly isn't anything anyone should believe now. That paper of theirs did a lot of damage by giving people who didn't want stimulus, who didn't want any kind of expansionary policy, a way to scare their opponents, to say if we don't do it my way, we'll go over the 90% line and terrible things will happen. And my problem now with Carmen and Ken is that while they have said a lot of things that indicate more flexibility, they have never, to my knowledge, said clearly, okay, there is no cliff at 90%. And we really need that from them to say, look, we think debt is dangerous, we think it's a problem, but 90%, that was an artifact of some things in our original calculation that do not appear in subsequent work.
Are you surprised how personal this has gotten?
You know, the stakes are high. I mean, I guess from my point of view, they went pretty far out on a limb with work which is far weaker than everything else in their careers, and unfortunately that became really that became what they were known for. And then if you said, well, this is really bad work and has had a deleterious effect on policy, which I believe to be the truth, how can it not be personal? And let me say, by the way, who cares, right? I mean, who cares about my feelings or Carmen Reinhart's feelings or Ken Brokaws' feelings? We're having a global economic crisis which is not over, which we have handled abysmally. We have massive long-term unemployment in the United States. We have massive youth unemployment in Southern Europe. I don't think the question of how civil a bunch of comfortable academic economists who went to MIT in the mid-1970s, oh boy, in the mid-1970s, I don't think that matters at all compared to the question of the substantive issues. And are we doing this wrong, which I think we are.
Paul Krugman, thanks for coming.